So it's Mother's Day. What does your mother really want today? Well, you may have given her a card or some flowers or called her today, but maybe today your mom might want a clean house. Maybe you could sweep and mop a little bit. Maybe your mom wants a good nap this afternoon. Maybe your mom wants a day at the spa. Maybe your mom wants just a free day where she doesn't have to be a mom. Maybe you could wash your car. Maybe for we guys, that honey-do list might become a honey-done list today. They would like that. Maybe they like a pedicure or a manicure. What do moms truly want? We might want to ask them. But today I think that one thing they may really want is time. Time with their kids. Now, I know when kids are young, Mother's Day might be one of those times you say, I just need a little bit of break today. But as our kids grow up and as they begin to become more mature and more independent, moms all long for more time together. Memories that they might develop and share. And so when we come together today, Paul tells us to pay attention to this matter called time. So what time is it? Well, there's a couple of different kinds of time. We could be talking this morning about what time is it? What time is it on our watch, which is Chronos time or calendar time. What day is it today? Well, it's Mother's Day. That's the time it is today. But I think Paul is trying to get to something called Kairos time, which means the right time, the opportune time. This idea of timing is very important. We usually recognize Kairos time when we get it wrong, when we flub up and do things at the wrong time. I once went to one of my friends in college's wedding the week before it happened. There was no one at the church when I got there, and I called Tim and said, Tim, where's the wedding? He said, that's next Saturday, Nelson. I said, well, I drove 2 hours. He said, well, we can have lunch then. And it developed into a pretty good time. Sometimes we get our timing wrong. If you watch that old TV show Friends, you know about Ross and Rachel, how their timing doesn't quite work out. Ross has harbored this crush on Rachel since the 9th grade, and he finally works up the nerve to tell her that he loves her, and in walks Paulo. And then after Paulo kind of goes off the scene and Rachel decides she might like Ross, Ross shows up with Julie, and back and forth it goes for 10 seasons. They never quite get together till the very last episode. This Kairos time, this right timing, sometimes we get it right and sometimes we don't. But Paul says, look at what's going on. Pay attention to this matter of time. Think about what it is that God might have you to do with your time. Sometimes days go when everything seems to go wrong. Other days, as a pastor, I walk into the hospital to make a hospital visit and come upon someone else in the church that I might not have even known was there. And they said, oh, Pastor, God must have sent you. Perhaps God did, because it was the Kairos time. Just happened to be there at the right time. We need to recognize those precious times in our life, those precious moments. Children grow up so fast, and those of us who have adult children look back and realize how precious time is. We who are promoting healthy families as a church and healthy church need to recognize that time together is so important. This past week on May 11th, my mom's passing was 5 years. I look back and I think of her, and I think of the times when I could have spent more time with her or called her more often. You see, time slips away from us, and we need to pay attention. In fact, Paul, in the verse just before what we read this morning, says, wake up. Wake up and pay attention. What does it take for God to get you to wake up and pay attention to what's going on in life? Mr. Brown taught world religions when I was in high school. I took that class right after lunch, And he was on the second level of the school, and our school did not have air conditioning. We were full, and it was hot. And he was teaching us world religions, which wasn't a subject a lot of us were that interested in. But Mr. Brown had a way of helping us pay attention. If you fell asleep, he took the metal trash can and a big stick, and he went up behind your desk, and he beat that thing, and you jumped up in the air, and everybody laughed, and it was really funny until he did it to you, and you jumped up. Paul says, wake up. Pay attention to what's going on in life because the days are evil. Now, Paul was talking to the church at Ephesus, and they lived in a pagan society, in a pagan world where no one was paying attention to God. Everyone was just doing what it was that they wanted to do. They were living for themselves. Can you imagine living in a society like that? You don't have to imagine, do you? It's a society in which we find ourselves as well, where it's all about us, and God says, pay attention. Pay attention because I am at work. There are decisions to be made between right and wrong. Will you live for yourself or will you live for God? How will you spend your time here on earth? Someone once wrote a book on the 5 regrets of those who are dying. They said as people look back at their life and as they think about it, they wish that they had had courage to live more of who God would have had them to be. They wish that they had not worked so much, but had instead spent time with those they love. They wish that they had had courage to express their feelings, to show their love more openly. They wish that they had kept in touch with their friends more. They wish that they had been happier in life. What regrets might you have if you were to look back on your life? Would you not like to come to the end of your life and look back and say, I have no regrets. I lived a good life. I listened when God was speaking. You see, this paying attention to what time it is, paying attention to what it is that God is telling us to do with our time is so important. What if you were to think of your life not in those 80 or 90 years that you might hope to get, but if you thought of your whole life in one day, and you only had 24 hours, how much of that day would be spent on work? How much would it be spent on sleep? How much would it be spent just watching television? Or how much would it be spent on doing those things that are truly, truly important to you? Prioritizing our days. Paul says, pay attention and make the most of the time. Redeem the time you have because it is fleeting. Early in my ministry, I had some problems with time management. I still do. I still don't always show up to the right things at the right time, get lost in the day and don't get everything done. And so I was talking to one of my deacons, and he said, I tell you what, Pastor, he said, the church will pay for you to go to the Franklin Covey Time Management Workshop. I said, okay. And so off I went for 2 days and learned how to manage my time better. And I was surprised at some of the things I learned there. They told us to do some things we already knew how to do, to make a to-do list, which I often did, but then they said, go back and prioritize that to-do list. What are things that have to be done in the first hour you're working? What are things that have to be done before lunch? What are things that have to be done before the day is over? And that changes your to-do list a little bit. But then they shifted and they said there's a even more important question about your day and your time. What on your to-do list is the most important thing you will do today? What is the thing that you're going to do that will make a difference in your life or in the life of others? For as Charles Hummel says, there is a tyranny of the urgent. Sometimes there is so much to do that we are overwhelmed. And we do not stop and prioritize what is the most important thing to do. You see, it's always the right time to do what is right. It's never wrong to do the right thing, as Mark Twain said, and my dad often said to me. Think of the life of Jesus and how he prioritized his time. Jesus says in John 6, I have come down from heaven not to do my will, but the will of him who sent me. I do nothing on my own, but I speak what the Father has taught to me, and I always do what pleases the Father. Perhaps today we would put in there what pleases our mothers as well. When we look at the example of Jesus, he was always doing the right thing at the right time. Do you remember when Jesus got lost? When Mary thought he was with Joseph and Joseph thought he was with Mary, and they went back and they finally found him at the temple, and he was there with the rabbis, and he says, I'm about my Father's business. Even back then, when he was a kid, he knew what was important: to show up to church and to learn of God's word. Do you remember that day when Jesus taught and taught and taught, and the disciples finally came to him and said, it's dinner time? You've lost track of the time? And Jesus said, feed them. If they are hungry, feed them. And they said, but we didn't prepare for this. And Jesus says, what have you got? And Jesus blesses it and breaks it, and he feeds the multitude. You remember that time when the disciples were looking for Jesus, and they looked everywhere for him and they could not find him, and finally they found him and they said, where were you? What were you doing? What was so important? There's work to be done. And he said, I was off praying, because if there is so much to be done, we must pray first. Do you remember when Mary and Martha sent word to Jesus and said, Lazarus is at his deathbed? And Jesus just kept healing others and teaching. And they got there and said, you're too late. Your time is up. Lazarus has died. And Jesus says, in God's time, things are different, and calls Lazarus forth from the grave. Jesus knew what time it was, and Jesus was always paying attention to what it was that God would have him to do with our time. You see, this thing of time is important to us. We need to prioritize and ask God, what is it you would have us to do with this gift of time today? To do what is right. I remember a deacon's meeting some years ago. I was a younger pastor, and I was kind of scared because they were almost fighting with each other. One side thought we should do this, and another side thought we should do that. And I don't even remember exactly what it was. I just remember the tension in the room, and I remember Steve raised his hand. He said, I don't know what we should do, but I think we should do the right thing. And I said, I'm with Steve. Let's do the right thing. And he said, Pastor, that's what we're trying to decide. And we talked about what is it that God would have us to do with this decision. Did your mom ever give you any advice about what was right and what was wrong? I've been reading lists of these on the internet. Here are a few things that moms have said to their kids. Make sure you have your own money before you go out. Don't take a bath in a thunderstorm. Well, that makes sense. Always wear clean underwear. Never ride a motorcycle. Some of us have done that, but moms say no. Mind your manners and hold your head high. Be kind to your brothers and sisters, for after your father and I are gone, you'll need each other. Show me who your friends are, and I will show you who you are. This too shall pass. Be a credit to your community. Never miss an opportunity to learn a new skill. Anything worth having is worth working for. Manners are free, and people will judge you by your etiquette. Think good thoughts. Look in the mirror and see if you see a friend there. If not, find that friend. Drink lots of water and put on sunscreen. Thus, some good advice. And we can think back and think of all these things that our mothers have said to us, and they might help us think about what is right to do with our time. But I have one last piece of advice to you from Paul's letter to the Ephesians. Paul says, in all of the time that you have, be thankful. Paul says, do not get drunk with wine, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another with psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. Sing and make music in your heart to God, always giving thanks to God, for the Father has blessed us with so much. Give thanks to God through our Lord Jesus Christ. What about this morning as we think about Mother's Day? Are you thankful? Are you thankful for your mom? I was thinking of my mom today. I remember that my mother, who was a school teacher, used to help me the day before school started. When I was young, I was very anxious, and I could not sleep the day before the first day of school. I never thought about that it was her first day of school and that she was going to have 100 kids come through her classes the next day. But I couldn't sleep, and so Mom would sit by me, and I'd say, would you sit here till I fall asleep? And she would, and I would. I wonder how she did that so many years. I remember the time my mom took me to vacation Bible school. But it wasn't the vacation Bible school at our church. My mom was volunteering at a vacation Bible school at another church. This happened to be an African American church. And I was the only white kid there for the whole week. And I remember my mom telling me, this is how your black friends feel most every day of their lives. And I learned a great lesson that week. I remember when my mom helped me learn to laugh at myself when I was in middle school when someone accidentally sprayed mustard across the table and I had a big yellow stain and I was upset the rest of the day. And my mom was a teacher. I went to her class. I said, look at this. I said, everybody's laughing at me. And she said, well, I'm so sorry that happened, but Nelson, it is kind of funny, isn't it? And then I looked down and laughed too. But mostly I'm thankful today that my mother prayed for me. Prayed for me every day of my life, just as you pray for your children. On my mother's tombstone is Micah 6:8. The verse says, he has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. That was a verse my mom lived by and lived out. And it's her greatest advice to us ever. I've got a homework assignment for you today. I know you say it's church, we don't get homework, but you do today. It's Mother's Day. Whether your mother's alive or whether your mother's gone on to be with the Lord, why not stop today and make a gratitude list about your mom or about some woman that influenced your life? If your mom's alive, call her and read it to her. If she's not, read it to yourself and to your children and thank God for your mother. It's time.